Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today I'm honored to be joined by somebody I'm a huge fan of, Daniel Pink. For those who don't know, Daniel Pink is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, including his latest, The Power of Regret. His other New York Times bestsellers include When and A Whole New Mind, as well as number ones, Drive and To Sell As Human. Dan's books have been translated into 42 languages, won multiple awards, and have sold millions of copies around the world. Dan, thanks for making the time. How are you today?
I'm good, Adam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were Al Gore's chief speechwriter from 95 to 97. Then you went out on your own, at least as that I understand it. And you summarized a lot of that experience working as an independent in the Fast Times article called Free Agent Nation about people working for themselves in the gig economy. How do you look back at the role that article played in your career pivot and all the success that's followed?
Well, I wrote a book called Free Agent Nation too. That was a much more comprehensive examination of this phenomenon. And again, that book is 20 years old, which is kind of astonishing in and of itself. And there I said, hey, listen, I think there's something going on there. I think that more people are becoming independent. They're working as freelancers and e-lancers and self-employed professionals and proprietors of very small businesses. And this is, before we had the phrase gig economy. I think that in general, I was more right than wrong, which is probably a good place to be if you're a writer. Certainly, I think that one of the things that I underestimated there was, as I explained this phenomenon, one of the forces that I thought was powering it was technology. And I wrote that before smartphones, before social media, before text messages, before the metaverse, before widespread broadband. And so I think that technology has put a huge, before YouTube, before podcasting,
before influencers.
Absolutely. And so I think that I really underestimated the accelerating effect that technology would have. So I think I was right on the direction, but wrong on the velocity.
Yeah. How has your view around the Free Agent Nation changed since the article in the book?
Well, I think one of the again, I'm trying to, if you look at like what I didn't quite get right, which I think is a healthy way to think about it, is that I didn't quite identify how much this ethic, this idea of the shift from risk from the organization to the individual would actually affect people who still had W-2 jobs. That still had so that what it looks like to be working in corporate America and what it looks like to be working in Free Agent Nation has grown a lot more similar. There was a much starker divide between those two worlds. And now, especially today, Adam, 2022, when you have people who are working remote, essentially full time, and who are staying with a company for a year, 18 months, working mostly. That's essentially a project. That's barely a job, And so I think that one of the things I didn't quite identify accurately was how much corporate America would begin to resemble Free Agent Nation in terms of how much risk was placed on people's shoulders, how much they were responsible for even programmatic things like pensions and health insurance and continuing education, and how much the affinity between individuals and organizations would grow even weaker than it was 20 years ago.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of those trends obviously were accelerated in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So bravo on getting more right than wrong. It's a huge accomplishment. Your writing style, seems different from a lot of others. My understanding is that you'll pick a topic you'll want to write about, to learn about, to write about. How did this come to be for you?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I just, I have to say that, writing books is at least for me, I think it's true for most people, but it's definitely true for me, is very, very difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a huge amount of time. It takes a huge amount of effort. And in the course of doing it, a lot of the days, a lot of the moments is actually not that fun. It's a grind. I think it's true. I think this is true for many. I think it's true for entrepreneurship. I mean, there are many days if you're running a business that it's just not fun. You know, I think that we look at it, if you look at like a professional athlete, that a lot of what he or she does is just a grind. And so the same thing is true with writing books. And therefore I think it's incredibly important that you pick something that you really, 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 really care about, that you're really interested in, and that you're willing to live with. And I don't say this as a joke, that you're willing to live with essentially for the rest of your life. And so there are ideas that you are kind of sort of interested in, maybe you want to go out on a few dates with, but there aren't that many ideas, concepts that you really want to get married to for a long time. And I think you have to be very choosy about it. I think you have to be very, very choosy about that. So for me, the most important criterion in the topics that I choose is whether I am deeply, deeply, deeply interested in it, because that's the only way it's going to be a good book. And the other thing is that I'm not that special. So if I'm really interested in something, chances are other people are going to be interested in it too. But I want to emphasize how much. I mean, I had this. It's like you live with these things for a very long time. Case in point, last week, Adam, somebody said to me. I had a book that came out a few months ago, and somebody says to me, "Oh, so are you done promoting the new book?" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm still promoting books I wrote 20 years ago." Just like you and I had a conversation a few minutes ago about something I did 20 years ago. That's cool. I like it. It's great. It's great. Yeah. I still want to talk about Free Agent Nation, but there are plenty of ideas that I had 20 years ago that I've forgotten or have no interest in ever having a conversation about again.
Yeah. In the process of choosing a new topic, I mean, how many lists of yellow legal paper are you going through, ideas you're going on date with before you pick, for instance, The Power of Regret?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I can quantify it, but the process that you're describing or the process that you're implying is exactly right. I basically start with like a massive list, just sort of shards of ideas and things like that I keep. I'm sort of both a digital and analog pack rat in that I have lots and lots of paper files. I keep a lot of paper notebooks. I have massive folders of stuff on Dropbox. If evildoers ever hit the Dropbox main servers, my life would be over. If you want to fully destroy me, evildoers out there, go and just obliterate the Dropbox servers wherever they live, because then I would have nothing. It would be like my house. It'd be worse than my house burning down. So I keep those, and then I review them periodically, and then I test them out. So I might do as you mentioned, Free Agent Nation began as an article, so that's a way to test to see whether I'm interested in it, whether readers are interested in it. So I'll test things that way. I also write for books. I also write fairly lengthy book proposals, not super long, but maybe 25, 30 pages, and that's essentially a way to test myself to see whether there's a there. And I've written several book proposals that I've gotten to the end of them and said, this is not a book, or this is not a good book, or this is not a book I want to write.
Sure. Yeah, your writing process kind of sounds similar to David Brooks described his process as like crawling on his hands and knees, looking at out of context Post-it notes.
Yeah, no, I think that's crawling on hands and knees, looking at out of context Post-it notes while wearing a necklace of steak and their mean tigers around the periphery yapping at you. I want to up the stakes a little bit from what David said.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, it's very in line with Stephen Pressfield's concept of battling the resistance.
Well, take a look at this.
Wow. Be the resistance. That's special, man. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of related to that. In one of your rules of writing, you talk about number 6, and I'd be curious on how up to date and how much you follow these and how these have changed. But on your website, remember that writing, though solitary, is also social. You're making a promise to the readers. You got to honor that promise. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that it's a helpful way for me, at least, to think about writing, which is that if I write something and put it out in the world, I am asking a lot from people. So let's take a book. So I write a book, and I'm saying to people out there, you know what? The $20 that you spend on this book is better than $20 you would spend on anything else. Don't give that $20 to charity. Give it to the bookstore so you can buy my book. Don't go spend it on groceries. Don't buy yourself, a ticket to a movie or whatever, whatever. The $20, the highest and best use of that $20 is to buy my stuff. But wait, that's not only it. Because what I also want is I also want you to spend 8 or 9 hours with me. And there are opportunity costs to those 8 or 9 hours. So I'm saying those 8 or 9 hours are better spent with my stuff than talking to your kids, going for a run, going out to dinner, taking a nap. And so
starting to learn a new language.
I'm asking a lot. And so I have to really, so when I think about that, it's like, that's the promise that I'm making to readers. And I have to really deliver and over deliver on that promise. And what's frustrating to me as a reader is how many books don't deliver on that. So I think about that explicitly. So that's sort of like the macro promise is that basically what I'm saying is that the money and time that you spend on my books is going to be valuable. Trust me that when you get to the end of those 8 hours, you're going to say, man, I'm glad I spent those 8 hours with Pink, or I'm glad I spent the $20 on that book because it was better than spending it on 4 lattes or on a new pair of shoelaces. So that's it. But there's also a micro promise there is that sometimes when I'm stuck in writing, that I will say, let's say, oh my God, why is this chapter so hard to write? And I think, okay, what's the promise this chapter is making? And so I think about it at a micro level too, which is like, what's the promise this chapter is making? This chapter is on anticipating regret. Okay, so the promise that I'm making is that by the end of this chapter, you're going to understand what it means to anticipate your regrets and how you can anticipate your regrets more effectively. And anything in that chapter that's not in the service of that promise probably doesn't deserve to be there.
What was the driver behind the book? What made you want to commit?
The driver behind the book was the driver behind all my books. It was my own curiosity. And in this case, the curiosity was not purely intellectual. It was or conceptual. It was very personal because I realized that I had regrets, and I wanted to try to make sense of them. And what I found when I started talking to people about my regrets is that the response that I got was very different from what I expected. I expected people just to kind of recoil and be appalled when I talked about my regrets, and for them to sort of shrink into their own shame because they didn't want to talk about them. And what I found was the reverse. That this was a conversation that people wanted to have, that my regrets were very similar to other people's regrets, and that by airing them, both of us were able to make sense of them and understand it and chart a path forward. And so, one of the things that I like, one of the things that sort of gets me up in the morning is is when sort of the popular understanding of something is demonstrably wrong. And I can try to show that and explain how to think about it more clearly.
Awesome. You've written about such a wide range of topics from, free agent nation and what we now know as the gig economy to sales to motivation and now regret. Do you see any common themes when you look back at your body of work?
There's certainly no common theme strategically and in advance. It's not like I had some kind of grand plan, or if you widen the believe me, there was no grand plan.
Yeah.
It's not like if you widen the shot here of my office that you're going to see some, one of those like crime boards with like yarn and some kind of master plan there. Maybe there are connections retrospectively. I do think that one common theme maybe is how much every topic that I explore seems to come back to our search for meaning, our search for purpose, our search for trying to make sense of like why we're here and how we can best spend this vanishingly short amount of time. But that's not by intention. That's something that readers or even I might notice looking backward on it.
Yeah, Steve Jobs said something to the effect of, we can't connect the dots looking forward, but we can connect the dots looking backwards, and we can use that as a fuel for some sort of trust that things are going to work out.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's possible. I don't do it, but I think it's, maybe I should, maybe it's healthy, but I think it's possible to connect the dots retrospectively. But again, not to get all woo-woo on you, I think the other thing about it that you sometimes realize is that the person who wrote Free Agent Nation and the person who wrote Free Agent Nation in 2001 and the person who wrote The Power of Regret in 2022 are in some sense different people. And so, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, what are the common themes between Fred's book and Maria's book? Just in the same way, because you would say, well, they're different people. So I don't know, maybe they have some similarities, but why should they necessarily have that much in common? Because it's two different people who wrote the book. Now, I don't want to take this argument too far.
That's fair. That's fair.
But there is, some pretty good evidence in both in psychology and neuroscience that we are in some level different people at different points in our life.
Yeah, it is interesting though. Like I can trace basically my entire reading career based on certain themes and how themes served different interests. But I think that makes sense. You're two different people at two different points in time, living different circumstances. What's next? What's next for you after The Power of Regret? I know you're still promoting it, but anything you're thinking about for a future project?
I'm really not sure. I'm just, going to take some time to explore. I mean, at some level, a lot of the way that people work, the way that people think, the way that people create, invent, build stuff is by oscillating between exploration and exploitation, so that you have moments, you have periods where you are very divergent and you're bringing stuff in and you're looking widely. I think it's true for entrepreneurs. I think it's true for all kinds of professionals. You have periods where you're divergent, and then you have periods where you're working on something and you're much more convergent. You're exploiting. You are execute. I mean, exploiting has a bad connotation, but it's sort of like exploration and execution is another way to think about it. So, and I've been in execution mode for a while, and now I'm going to transition out of that and go into exploration mode for a while.
Yeah, contemplation and action.
Right, exactly. And in some ways it's, exactly. Contemplation, action, exploration, and execution. And they're both really, important. If you spend all your time exploring, you're never going to create anything. If you spend all your time executing, you might get very good at creating things that don't matter. So I really do think that there is this oscillation, this trade-off, this is almost this rhythm between those two modes.
Me too. Well, you've been very gracious with your time. For folks out there looking to keep up on the work you do, what's the best way for them to find you?
You can go to my website, danpink.com. I have a newsletter. I'm not super active on social media. I'm a little down on social media these days. But the email newsletter is a pretty good source of stuff. Cool.
Well, we'll make sure to have the link to your website on the show notes. But Daniel, appreciate the time. Look forward to continuing the conversation soon.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me.